And I would like to move to our next keynote speaker, Dr. Nnimmo Bassey, Director, HOMEP, Nigeria. Thank you for your patience. Dr. Nnimmo Bassey will speak on the roots of extractivist and climate conflict. Dr. Nnimmo, if you can hear us, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a special, very big privilege for me to be a part of this symposium on peace and conflict. And thank you so much, Peter, for that presentation on culture. I think it does resonate with some of the things I would be speaking about. I'll try to be quick, and so I will be using slides to guide my presentation so I don't get lost in the forest. As already introduced, I'm speaking on the roots of extractivism and climate conflict. And the drivers of extractivism in the world today include the fact that labor has been cheapened by the extractivist sector, that they can more or less dispose of labor as they please. And because of lack of opportunities for employment, many people are forced to work in this sector and are more or less driven to accept unjust labor relations because they're getting alternative opportunities are not so easy. And then secondly, natural resources, nature's gift to humanity, nature's precious resources have been cheapened also because in the process of extractivism, the environmental costs have been externalized onto poor communities and the environment generally. And then again, the market is, sometimes we hear about the hidden hand of the market, but the market's hands are not so hidden. There are clear hands manipulating prices, speculators who are driving the cost of natural resources. And so the market remains often on the side of those who are engaged in extractivism, and so the has been able to maintain the steam because also they work behind military shields. We see this in areas where there's mining, whether it's solid minerals or petroleum resources, or even extraction of timber from pristine rainforests. Now, the roots of the conflict can also be tracked to the pollution from extractive sector, including those who are producing dirty energy resources like coal, like crude oil, and like fossil gas, and then unfortunately also can have also polluting resources coming from renewable energy materials. For example, the material being extracted in places like the Congo for production of batteries and other parts that are used to produce the computers. We depend on the phones and even the cars. And then secondly, we look at the deforestation. Forests have been, trees generally accepted as good carbon sinks, and they do hold carbon, but of course no tree lives forever, so temporary holding of carbon sink of carbon. Then we have the plantations that are growing. They are still at a time when we need biodiverse forests. We're having big corporations setting up plantations to meet industrial needs and causing deforestation in the process. Even though the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization calls plantations forests, we do know that plantations are not the same thing as forests because these are monocultures. Mining also causes a lot of deforestation. We have cases where places right inside deep forests are turned into deserts. The production of infrastructure for various reasons. Already heard about displacement caused by climate change, and this is forced migration. And there's been a very studied refusal of the global multilateral system to recognize those displaced by climate change as refugees. Now, the question is always, or the argument is always that they cannot be recognized as refugees because there was no definition of climate refugees in the original statute, in the original covenant that were made many years ago. And then these conflicts really supported. I think we heard a lot about the place of culture and the conflicts that we have coming from extractivists and related sectors relate to the increasing marginalization of certain parts of our populations, the exclusion of social groups in terms of decisions on what to do with the gift that nature has for us. And kind of marginalization and exclusion also could not relate to economic issues and sometimes outright environmental racism on the part of those who are carrying out the exploitation. And one other factor that locks in the conflicts, generates and locks in the conflict that we see from extractivism, from climate change, is persisting, prevalent mentality, which can best be labeled as coloniality. Coloniality has been defined as the mentality by which colonialism sustains itself despite flag independence. And so we always think that this is the way things must go because that's what the colonial masters laid down. And so talking about the things that fuel climate change, I like this image very much, and I hope you're seeing it. It's the first oil well that was drilled that yielded commercial quantities of oil in Nigeria. It's a oil well. It should be very, very emblematic of any area in the global south where oil is extracted. That when the well runs dry or it's not yielding as much as was expected at the beginning, it becomes a monument. This oil well has been designated a monument, but we do know that this could actually be a time bomb because even though the well has been has produced and yielded all the petrodollars that the state and Shell oil company wanted, they could one day come back to it with new technology to drill to try to capture more oil. Now, just speaking about oil wells, in Nigeria at the moment, we have an oil well that was drilled decades ago just on the banks of Santa Barbara River in the Niger Delta. I'm sharing two pictures. One picture of the well taken in October 2019, and a picture of what is going on right now in that location. Now you can see from the photo on the left that this oil well had been left derelict and dilapidated for many years, for decades. And suddenly, on 1st November 2021, that's 1 month now, it erupted. This well erupted, and it is spewing hundreds of thousands of crude oil into the Santa Barbara River and flowing all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Another case I would like to share with us off the coast of Niger Delta, about 10 kilometers off the coast of the Niger Delta, is an oil well known as in the Orodo 1 oil well that was being drilled by Chevron and then taken over by the Nigerian state. This gas rig, this well blew up in May 2020, has been on fire since then, and is just polluting and destroying the aquatic ecosystem, polluting the waters, washing up to, you can see from satellite images, it looks like a snake, but these are kilometers long trail of possible oil slick. There's fire going on at the oil well right here, and it's affecting the entire ecosystem, affecting artisanal fishing in this area, apart from the restrictions, loss of economic opportunities, loss of fisheries, blockage or barricades against economic activities by artisanal fishers because of naval officers who are protecting facilities, oil facilities, rather than the humans who have to who should ideally be interacting with the ecosystems and make a living from it. Now, between 2018 and 2019, according to the Nigerian National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, there was a record 1,300 oil spills, averaging 5 oil spills daily. Now, if you
here is that we have lost the connection with Dr. Nnimmo Bassey. We are waiting for him to rejoin us. There were some technical difficulties from his line, so
you lost me there for some moment. I apologize. It's not my doing. It wasn't designed by me. It's the system.
Welcome back, sir.
That gave up on me. Now I'll try to be quicker so that I don't get stopped by the system. So I'll just move faster so I can share the points that I need to share. I'm showing you a picture of gas flood. This releases so much toxic elements to the atmosphere, destroying agriculture, destroying human health, creating conflicts in communities by pitting people struggling just to survive because oil corporations want to get oil and gas from the region. I just want to remind us of what happened in Marikana in South Africa when miners in the platinum mine demanded better wages, and then the police came in and so many miners lost their lives. So there's issue of lives being lost directly by conflict with using military force against people. You're having conflict from like mining in Amazon in the photo I'm showing on the left. You can imagine a pristine rainforest becoming like a Martian or a landscape from outer space. And then in the Congo, massive deforestation, simply destroying livelihoods. And now because corporations and politicians like to depend on resources from an extractive sector. And the COVID crisis has helped. I said help, very, very carefully choosing that word, to lower the price of crude oil. And so many countries who depend on this resource to balance their budget are struggling to do that. Nigeria requires a barrel of oil to be up to about almost $140 per barrel to be able to balance her budget. But right now, she's not even able. Nigeria is no longer number one in Africa in terms of oil production. Libya has overtaken Nigeria. So Nigeria is struggling to produce about 1.4 barrels a day at the moment, when it used to produce up to 2.5. And so depending on one resource, enforcing extractivist ideals so as the balanced budget is becoming a very dangerous thing to do. My organization just published a report called Africa Caught in the Fossil Trap. And we chose this topic because if you read from what we hear from the African Union, from politicians, from Nigerian presidency, there's this insistence that Africa must stay with fossil fuels when the world is moving away from it, because Africa contributed very little to global warming, and therefore we have a right to continue with the polluting pattern because this is the only way we can develop. It sounds interesting politically, but really we've had decades of fossil fuel extraction, and we can ask ourselves, where has that taken us to? If Africa insists on persisting, on staying with a resource that has had negative impact on the citizens of our continent, and then present the picture that this is the only way to develop, whatever that means, to develop the continent, then we can also insist that this is a pipe dream, the pipe dream that may not yield anything different from what we've seen already. But that's what we're seeing in Uganda. There's oil that's going to be piped. If the government has its way, if the Chinese corporations have their way, Total has the way to pipe from near Lake Victoria, Lake Albert, all the way to Tanga in Tanzania for export. There are plans also to take natural gas from Nigeria to Morocco, not for African countries to enjoy to use the gas, but to ship to Europe ultimately, because that's where the metropole is, and that's where the colonial economic relations have always taken resources to. Now, climate justice, climate injustices all add up to drive conflicts, and I'm going to dwell on this for a few minutes before I round up. Going on what happened recently at COP26 in Glasgow. That COP26 means Conference of Parties of United Nations Convention on Climate Change. COP26 just held in Glasgow. Now, that convention was predicated on the justice platform of common but differentiated responsibilities, and recognized the fact that different entities, different countries, especially the rich industrialized countries, contributed much more to the stock of carbon in the atmosphere, and therefore they should also do more in terms of cutting emissions, in terms of providing climate finance, in terms of sharing technology for the vulnerable nations who never contributed much to be able to tackle the crisis, to mitigate and adapt and build resilience to global warming. Now, the common but differentiated responsibility is now on life support, merely mentioned in the Paris Agreement and still being dragged along at every conference of parties. But the truth is, as soon as the Copenhagen Accord in 2009, as soon as the Paris Agreement in 2011 brought in the issue of voluntary emission reduction, and now documented as a creed in what is now called the nationally determined contributions, which means nations do what they choose to do in terms of emission reduction, whatever is convenient for them to do. As long as they do this, it means justice has been thrown out of the window, because right now, Paris Agreement said the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level as temperature increase, tolerable temperature increase above pre-industrial levels, or so-called well below 2 degrees. I don't want to go into the argument about what is well below 2 degrees, because if something is really well below 2 degrees, it should be less than 1.5. Otherwise, it's not well below 2. Now, if 1.5 is the lower limit, the best limit, and the well below 2 is left at the higher limit, we see the contradiction in this kind of presentation. But from all the nationally determined contributions submitted by governments, the United Nations system has analyzed the submissions before the COP took place. It said that if every nation did what they said they were going to do, the world is heading for 2.7 temperature increase. Now, that would be a disaster. Now, during the COP, more things were put on the table. And now the calculation is that the world is heading for 2.4 degrees Celsius temperature increase above pre-industrial level. Now, for Africa and for a whole lot of tropical nations in the tropical belt, that means about 50%, their temperatures are increasing at about 50% higher than the global average. So if you have 2.4 as the global average, you are talking of 3.6 or thereabout for Africa. Now, if you have anything more than many things in that range, it means that there's disaster on the horizon. And so the climate conference ought to be a place to treat the climate crisis as an emergency. But we're seeing politicians and negotiators kicking the can down the road, making pledges to achieve net zero by 2050 or 2060 or 2070 or by the turn of the century, meaning that climate action is now pushed to children, those who are children now, because they are the ones who would have to face this crisis of inaction that we're seeing. The issue of loss and damage, these are things that loss and damage, if finances are made available to tackle loss and damage, this could reduce the climate conflict. But again, the negotiators merely just gloss over this. They just say we're going to do something about it, making pledges and making promises and more talk and no action. Now, I should just put on the table again that net zero does not mean zero emissions. It means you continue to emit business as usual, continue to pollute, continue to extract resources, continue to destroy ecosystem, commit ecocide, use the military to pacify the people, but then show how you can, through carbon trading, attain carbon neutrality, or by carbon capture and storage, or by some other calculations or postulations, including what has been presented through geoengineering. And geoengineering is actually a planetary way of grabbing the skies. It's a techno-fix that is not proven and that cannot be carried out at a small scale. It's a way of trying to grab the planetary thermostat. And this would be a big problem. We could go into this, but this will take a lot of time. Some of the things being proposed is to whiten the clouds to reflect radiation from the sun back into the sky, to some others propose to fertilize the ocean with iron filings, or to genetically engineer trees to absorb more carbon through enhanced chlorophyll or photosynthesis, or to fertilize the ocean to absorb more carbon, to trigger algae bloom, and this would die and then go to the bottom of the ocean. or to just capture the carbon from factories or wherever they're produced, or suck it from the atmosphere and bury them in rock formations or beneath the ocean. All these are things that could fail in future, even if they succeeded today, and then create more problems for people. And then one key point I should mention here before I move forward is that whoever drives geoengineering would have the power to ensure that the negative impact is kept away from where they come from, and then placed on somewhere else. So somewhere would be recognized, would be taken as a sacrificial zone, and you can imagine where that would be. And then another zone would be the sacred zone that will enjoy the benefits. And so we see more conflicts being built by the multilateral system, by extractivism, and by climate inaction. And all this is because, I say again, as a roundup, environmental racism, neocolonialism, inequalities, gender discrimination, because women are suffering more of climate conflict than the men, then ecocide coming from pollution at the supply side of fossil fuels. And so how do we tackle this? We have to decolonize narrative, call these things what they are, recover our ecological resilience, defend communities, stop extraction, like the Ogoni people have done by keeping the fossils in the ground, like the struggle had been in the Amazon, the Ecuadorian Amazon at ITT area, although this did not work, as the fishermen in Norway, Lofoten region are fighting to stop oil extraction off their coast, and as places in Costa Rica have resolved not to go into the extractivist sector in terms of fossil fuel resources. And then, of course, we build resource democracy by ensuring, through whatever means, cultural, economic, social, that people who live in territories where nature's gifts are abundant have a right about what is done, right to say about what is done with those resources, the right to say we don't want this extracted, or we want to extract this in this way or that way. And then again, we should all fight to recognize, to have the right of Mother Earth recognized globally through the United Nations system, and the obligations of human beings to do what we need to do to ensure that nature, that the right of nature to maintain her cycles is not abridged, and that more resources are being put into defending ecosystems and fighting against global warming and not creating the problems, that more money does not go into warfare with $2 trillion every year by rich countries, so invested in destruction, where at a time when 100 billion cannot be found to fight for global warming. And then finally, I urge all of us to dare to believe that positive change is possible, and look at optimism as a political act. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nnimmo Bassey. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I would like to ask our colleagues if there are any questions or remarks for Dr. Nnimmo Bassey. Could you please raise your hand? Yes, Peter, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nnimmo Bassey, for your presentation. I was really interested in the slide around the pipeline that goes from all the bottom of the west coast of Africa all the way up to Morocco, and what came to my mind was this pipe dream that China has. How do you think this pipeline will avoid the fate of so many other pipelines out there? In order to have a pipeline and to have energy, the transmission of energy from one part of the world to the next, you need to ensure that you have a lot of stability. And the first thing that came to mind was Western Sahara, and if countries aren't happy, how they could maybe hijack that pipeline. Look at what's happening in Central Asia and in the Middle East at the moment over pipelines and exploitation agreements that run out after 50 years. With those pipelines, how do you think this pipeline might be any different to other pipelines? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I don't really think that this pipeline will be any different. In fact, when the pipeline was first built, the idea was built from Nigeria to Ghana. supplying gas to factories in Togo and Benin Republic and then Ghana. Now, the idea between Nigeria and Morocco is to extend the pipeline. And one of the reasons being given is that the pipeline will help in regional integration, but you can't integrate any region with pipelines. So I'm not really concerned about the security of the pipelines. I'm concerned about the climate impact, because pipelines are notorious for leaking methane. And methane is one of the most dangerous gases in terms of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, causing the climate problem. One of the pipelines that is really generating conflict on Africa right now is the East African crude oil pipeline going from Uganda to Tanzania. Now, they've not started building it, but the fisher folks, the farmers, the communities have risen up against it, and some financial backers have pulled out. We're hoping that more will pull out, and that will not really happen because the pipeline is carrying very waxy oil. It has over a distance of about 1,445 kilometers. It's going to be heated up about 10 times along the route, and it's passing on the western coast of Lake Victoria, which Victoria Basin supplies fresh water to about 40 million Africans. And so when you put this pipeline through that basin, there's going to be serious conflict because their continent is already undergoing water stress, and then this kind of threat is completely unnecessary. And the whole idea is, again, to export the resource out of Africa. So we have infrastructures that create conflict on the continent, not to integrate the continent, not to meet the needs of the continent, but to meet the needs of people elsewhere and get petrodollars that brings more conflict on the continent and elsewhere.
Thank you for your answer. Are there any questions or remarks for Dr. Nnimmo Bassey?
Thank you very much, Nnimmo Bassey. And Nnimmo Bassey, I just wanted to ask about China as well, because one of the things we're witnessing across the world with the Belt Road Initiative that China is building and all these economic corridors is economic casualties. And you know, Sri Lanka in 2017 became the first economic casualty. Now we have Kenya, Djibouti, Tajikistan. We have a lot of tension building up in the Solomon Islands near us in Australia. Our government just had to send over the army because the Chinese area, the Chinatown, was completely burnt down. I don't know if you're receiving this news in your part of the world. And you know, how do you think Africans in general and Nigerians and every other African nation that's benefiting from these investments is seeing China? Is it as a one way? Is it two things? Are they just taking the money, and or is there something much more meaningful that is evolving between these African states and China's investment in them?
Again, thanks, Peter. I think what I could just respond to that would be in a very quick, short way is to say that what is being experienced now is a new form of colonialism. And it's coming from a friendly nation. Most of us like the Chinese system, but I think they're very vicious in the way they're making these gifts and help around the world today. We're seeing a situation where in Zambia already, they've taken over some national assets because of lack of capacity to pay back the loans. And they're very strict about recovering the money. So they make the infrastructure look like it's a gift they're giving to countries, but these are very astute business people. Already there's a trend to take over the international airport in Uganda because of lack of payment, defaulting, and because they also agreed when they signed the agreement that if we default, you can take these facilities. So African countries and whoever is taking it from China must be very, very clear. If the agreement is written in Chinese, you better find someone to interpret it into a language that you understand. So you don't sign with a signed agreement that will be enforced against your own interests. Unfortunately, this is happening. I was watching a news report recently on one international channel. Among the resources shown, among the investment of China shown on the screen was some international airports in Nigeria. So who knows what will happen tomorrow? Nigeria is on the track of really a borrowing being across, across generally. So who knows what the Chinese would do? And I think it's a very, while the Chinese may have good intentions and politicians may have good intentions, the way and manner in which they are penetrating the region, especially Africa, is not really adding much value because it's not very, I don't see economic, just like the fossil fuel industry. Less than 1% of the African workforce works in the fossil fuel industry. And less than 5% of the investment in the fossil fuel industry is made on the continent. And so you find when people support that mode of production, it's not really the benefit to the benefits of the people of the continent, but rather to the benefit of the industry and benefit of the politicians who work in cahoot with who are working with this industry. And so they're building conflict today and conflict for tomorrow. And I believe that the best way to go about this is, if you want to go into agreement with China or with the Club of Rome or with the IMF or whoever, ensure that the conditions are equitable and not things that would become a big burden for generations yet unborn.
For your answer. If there are no more questions for Dr. Nnimmo Bassey, we still have one more question from a Facebook follower, question that goes to Peter this time. Peter, if you would be so kind to reply. Our Facebook follower is watching us live on Facebook and she would like to hear your answer. Her name is Augusta and she was asking about, is there culture without religion?
Absolutely not. I'm a global trustee of United Religions Initiative, which is one of the largest grassroots interfaith organizations in the world, which is dedicated to daily interfaith and intercultural cooperation. And its aim is to cultivate justice and peace. And there's some CCs that have cooperation circles, about 1,000 of these organizations that's subscribe to their PPPs, they're called, and their principles and the preamble across the globe. And there's a few of them also in Nigeria. And interfaith is a great source for being able to build peace. There's every single religion in the world. There's a precept that it's about treat others the way you want to be treated. So I think we need to foster a more interfaith dialogue across the globe as a way of being able to cultivate peace.